Hello and welcome back to DMT Journal. I'm your host Sean, and we're going to talk about the infamous machine elves that's always associated with the breakthrough levels of a DMT or dimethyltryptamine trip. Now, before I get started, I have to stress again, I do not promote or condone the use of any drugs. That's first and foremost. Also, I want to acknowledge and I want you all to recognize the fact that I've only experienced these experiences naturally. And today I'm going to be talking about a specific story that's based obviously on true events from my life, or this cosmic point of reference, rather I should say, because it goes beyond life in my opinion. Now, if you paid attention to the last video, I talked about what I remember being my first experiences and basically my consciousness or my super focus being delivered to Earth. And that's a very, very descriptive video. So if you haven't watched it yet, it'll probably help you understand a lot of what's going on here based on these particular experiences. Now, obviously, when someone claims they experience DMT trips naturally, it's going to be taken with a grain of salt. But I actually had sensitivity to these type trips as well as other spiritual experiences, because I believe they're all one and the same, but they're all categorized differently, right? So I've been sensitive to this type information, or if you want to call it the other side, I've been sensitive to that side since birth and before that. And throughout my life, I did hit a point where I stopped having these experiences until recently, actually, and I forgot about them altogether. And it was while going through a reawakening, if you will, about 2020 to 2021, where slowly but surely I became more sensitive to what I used to experience all the time. And it's really humbling to know that at one point these type experiences were regular to me, but what happened was I completely forgot about them. Now, honestly, I can't really explain how or why I was ever able to perceive these things. I understand that some people have what they call natural kundalini awakenings, or it could be, if it's not natural, it could be triggered by, trauma. Other people have what I feel like is a divine path of karmas that lead to a spiritual awakening. And other people, they're enlightened seemingly out of nowhere, or certain things are aligned for them to become enlightened. And all of these things, they might seem like it's an accident or coincidence, but I feel like in most of these cases, if not all of them, it's the design of higher intelligence. And so again, if you listen to the last video, you'd understand that since I was an infant to an early child, 3-4 years old, I was always sensitive to these type experiences. Experiences we call psychedelic experiences we call lucid dreams, astral projection, seeing entities, seeing ghosts, whatever kind of paranormal activity or phenomena, etc., etc. I was highly sensitive to these things. Now, about the time I was 5 and 6 years old, my mind was going through a bit of reconstructiveness, because now I was being taken away from zoning out and not really focusing on anything to having to exercise cognitive function a bit more. Preschool, kindergarten, etc. Essentially, this started a disruption of flow, if you will. Both forms of information was causing a bit of conflict in my mind, and it resulted in me actually either focusing on one side fully or the other side fully, but there was never a point where there was an interjection. You know how people have those DMT trips, and as soon as they come down, they can't remember majority of it? It was sort of like that. Even if I was to have these experiences at this particular point, it would be very, very hard to actually remember what just happened. but I know based on subtle factors, such as like specific frames that I remember, specific things that I saw, on a very subtle level, I was able to validate that I did have those type experiences still. So at a particular point, I felt like I focused more on this side of things, on the grounded levels of earthly experience, than the other side. And I was able to make out more of what was going on here. I was in school. I knew about my grades and my homework and playing at recess and my mom picking me up. And, you know, throughout the entire day, my patterns were more focused on this side. But there was those experiences that kind of barged in, and some of them happened when I was asleep. Others would happen when I daydreamed. But I think majority of them happened when which is different from daydreaming, by the way, when I completely zoned out, meaning I was thoughtless. Because what it did was it took me back somewhere else that was always active. So if your brain feels like nothing is going on, 9 times out of 10, somewhere out there in the cosmos, or whatever the case you want to call it, in another dimension, there's probably some activity happening. So one of the most vivid of these experiences that I'm able to recall was one specific day where I woke up early, and I have lots of siblings. I'm one of 8 on my mother's side alone. So me and the boys, the other boys, I'm one of 4 boys. And I believe 2 of us, if not 3, I have to check my math on it, was born at the time. 2 of us. Okay, 2. Because one was born, he just wasn't old enough to walk or anything. He was about 1 year old. What we used to do was, we used to wake up super early and go outside. 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock. At that time, that just seemed like the norm for the neighborhood. The kids loved to be outside. The time of it didn't matter. And for the most part, things were a lot safer than it is now, even though I grew up in a very, very rough neighborhood. So with that said, sometimes I woke up from what felt like a very, very active night of dreaming. Sometimes not having any dream recall at all. But my brother and I, we used to rush outside, you know, to chill, to get ready to start the day, probably to meet up with other kids. And everybody wasn't woke at the time, but we just planned to be outside that long. And there were those particular days where I'd wake up alone and my brother would still be in the house. He'd still be asleep. If he was up, he was probably eating breakfast, taking a bath, whatever the case may be. So there were sometimes I would wait on him and or other kids to wake up, which could have probably taken hours, being that we were up a lot at 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning. And what I would do is, I knew I wasn't going to go too far because it wasn't really officially time to play. We just meet up with our friends and see who was all up. So what I used to do was just sit out in the front yard, in the grass. And I say that to say lots of times I didn't have any shoes on, not even socks. Sometimes I went out completely barefooted and I would just sit in the grass. Whether I was watching an anthill or anthole or just experiencing nature, just looking at my surroundings. But that's what I used to do. And I remember one time, this is the first time I can log what is similar to, if not definitely, a dimethyltryptamine trip being induced naturally. Aside from me being delivered to Earth, this was definitely the most profound and lucid experience I had at that point. And what happened was, it started with me feeling myself consciously tuning out of any potential Earth doubts, which was thinking about school, thinking about what I'm going to do later, thinking about what I might want to eat, thinking about my brother coming outside, thinking of the other kids in the neighborhood. I felt like a black hole, so to speak, swallowed all of that information. And what I was left with was stillness. I was not able to think for myself. But what did happen was, after that, I consciously noticed buzzing and ringing in my mind, and audibly everything, not audibly, but visually, everything was shaking. And I just kept hearing that ringing in my ears, and everything was shaking, and it felt like the more I noticed it, the more intense it got. And the next thing you know, I was completely gone. I was no longer seeing any grass, not the sun, not the houses I was familiar with. I was somewhere else, flat out, somewhere else, clearly. Now, the weird part is contrary to how I described this particular place in my last video, this was completely different to me. I didn't remember it. I didn't know what was going on. I felt like my ego had played a different role when I went back there, because now I recognize this as the same place that I came from, that place that I got delivered from. But things were a bit different. I felt differently about it. I was processing information differently, and I felt like all of that definitely influenced what I was seeing. So I was seeing lots of geometrical patterns again, shapes and colors, and things. The theme or the color that I seen the most was purple. And it seemed like whenever I seen that purple, and it was very intense, whenever I seen that purple though, what I was greeted or met with was dancing jesters. They looked just like clowns, but obviously they didn't have the same body makeup as a human. They were rapidly shape shifting, and I seen them kind of being zoomed in and zoomed out, and they were doing all kind of tricks, and they was coming from behind me and through me and whatever the case may be, like indescribably doing particular tricks that I just cannot describe with words. It was as if their intention was to prove to me that what I was seeing was impossible. Even though that's not the vibration that I got from it, that's the best way to describe what I saw. The vibration that I got from it was like, it was like distant family trying to reconnect with me. And what I remember is a spark hit me very subtly, like, hey, I kind of remember this. And as soon as that happened, that mostly theme of purple, it turned yellowish, and it was still very intense, but the yellow just felt friendlier. It felt more welcoming. And from there, I actually felt welcomed back. Now, in this state, I had no idea who or what I was. The only thing I was able to recognize is that this seemed to be a place that I might be familiar with, but because I had so much things polluting my ego, I was not too sure. So I had a specific kind of doubt, and things just felt a bit different than what I was used to from years ago when I would experience this. So in this first experience back, there was really no dialogue, and the trip only lasted for what I could think was probably 5 minutes, because I remember the come down, and actually remembering what the come down felt like, whether it's from past lives or my initial drop to earth or deliverance to earth or whatever the case may be. I felt like, okay, thank God, I know what this is. I'm gonna be back on earth. I'm gonna be, and at that point, my ego was slowly coming back to me. And next thing you know, I wake up or come to focus, and I'm back in the yard, and my consciousness is stronger. It feels more free-willed as to just being like a dead observer or observant, like I just felt. Now, for my small and young brain at the time, I definitely knew something had just happened that wasn't normal. From what I did remember, even though I obviously forgot a lot of the trip. It's the same thing as trying to recall a dream. If you don't grasp exactly what you're experiencing right when you wake up, then you're gonna lose it. So if anybody is interested in, and this is a side note, if anybody is interested in increasing their lucidity when they dream, obviously a dream journal is a great idea. I just had dreams 2 nights in a row where I woke up at 4 a.m. They were so profound to me. I woke up at 4 a.m. and I had to write them down because I didn't want to forget those experiences. So with that said, if I could have did that in this situation, I obviously would have. But as a child, when I did come to, I thought maybe twice. Once when it first happened, and a little bit later that day. I thought to explain it to my brother that I was waiting on to come outside. I thought to explain to him what had just happened. And I wasn't really thinking, there's no way he's going to believe me. I might as well keep it to myself. But what I was thinking was, there's just no way to describe it. I actually tried practicing in my head. And it's like, it was dead on arrival. I knew I couldn't do it. And that just sounds like DMT all in itself, right? So what happened after that was, I said, whatever. And I kind of moved on and went back to living regular life. And maybe 2 weeks later, I'm experiencing outside, I'm playing. Now, this was not 7, 8 o'clock in the morning. It was closer to noon, about 11-ish. And we were in a completely different spot. We were across the street. I actually cannot remember if I had shoes on. But what I do remember is being upset that I was told by the parents of my friends at the time that they couldn't come outside yet. And my brother was with me this time. And so what I did was I sat on the curb right in front of their house, which was maybe 3 to 4 minutes walking away from our own house, right across the street and a little bit farther down. And my brother was around. He was close to me, but not close enough to where he even bothered to talk to me. He was probably like playing with a tree, and that was the type things we did as a child. We liked to pick up sticks and just observe. We used to collect rocks and things like that. So he was doing something, and he was minding his business. And at this point, I was minding my business. And I sat on that curb, and my brain submitted fully to my eyesight. And I was just looking down, and I wasn't really looking at anything. You could actually say I was kind of resting with my eyes open. It actually felt a bit relaxing. I was just looking down on the ground, probably seeing another ant, probably seeing some form of a bug, a rock, and lo and behold, I accidentally zoned out again. And this time, it's the exact same thing, but I remember a lot more specifically this time. The buzzing, I actually felt it. I felt it as I heard it. And it was annoying. It hurt my forehead. I can genuinely remember exactly what it felt like. And it was not a pleasant experience for a child. And it scared me. Yet at this point, the exact same thing from last time happened. It felt like I was strapped to some space shuttle that was getting ready to take off. And it was fully powered on, and it was just ready to go. Like, that's the vibration that I felt. It felt like I was clearly about to take off. And I actually thought that my body was about to physically explode. This experience was met with lots of fear. However, when I did take off, boom, loud explosion, so to speak, but I was still visibly experiencing, and I was seeing those geometrical patterns, shapes, and colors again. I was seeing like very symmetrical and indescribable patterns. But the thing about this time is, and this is very, very important to note, I felt like what I was experiencing this time actually shifted to be more like my liking. Like, I remember it feeling like, or closely associated to some of the video games I was playing. Like, for instance, Donkey Kong 64, the Super Mario games on the Super Nintendo, games that I was playing at the time, games that was older family members, but those were the type games I grew up playing. And I remember just feeling the vibration of that fun and that excitement that I would get when I'm playing those games. Except what I was visually seeing was completely different. But this time, red was more of the most common color theme. And I didn't really see any entities. Nothing scary, no gestures, no clowns, no shape-shifting hybrids, nothing like that. So being that I associated this trip with more of a video game experience, and again, you have to take into consideration that this is a particular frame that I mentioned, and everything that I don't talk about, there's still like an endless amount of possibilities that other things could have happened, except this is what I remember precisely. So at this point, I associate this experience with being good. And once I felt the come down, I was actually like, oh no, I want to stay longer. And I didn't see anything. I didn't hear any entity at all that I can recall, at least. But I did feel the vibration that you can come back, but you have to go now. And I'm like, okay, whatever. And again, I didn't know that I was a child. I didn't know that I was a boy. I didn't know that I had just blasted off somewhere and experienced this. I just knew that this was a place that I wanted to stay, and I was getting kicked out. Just that simple. So I come to, and my brother is actually gone. He had went back to the house. Now, the profound correlation of these experiences and 3D reality is, in this particular case, my brother could have easily interrupted me. He could have easily tried to bring me back by bothering me. I don't know if he tried to, and maybe I was just so far gone that he said, okay, whatever, and went back to the house. He wasn't necessarily at the age where he felt like it was logical for him to explain that. But if he didn't try, that's wild, because I felt like then that experience happened because it was supposed to happen. But if he did, at any rate, I had no recollection of it, and he never really stressed like, hey, you spazzed out, or you zoned out, or you're doing something weird and I was ignoring you. It's like he chose to mind his business on the exact thing. So at this point, I wanted to keep this to myself. I didn't want to talk about it because the child in me felt like, and this is incredible, right? I didn't feel like I was going to be embarrassed, just like the first trip. I didn't feel like nobody was going to understand. What I felt like was this was subjective and sacred to me, and I didn't want to share it. I didn't want anybody else to be able to say, hey, this happens to me too, or I want that to happen to me, because it would potentially kill the fun. So at this point, remembering the specs that I remember from the second time around and pondering about what they could have meant and genuinely wanting to experience it again at that point, it helped me remember what happened the first time around. And so I would do things on purpose to try to trigger these type experiences. I would try to zone out into nothingness. I would try to focus on rocks. Because when you think of outside, you think of sticks, rocks, grass, things of that. And in my mind at the time, if I had to guess, I felt like rocks were more sophisticated than sticks, grass, or even trees. That was just the weird logic I had at the time. So I focused a lot. I would even pick rocks up and just stare at them and look at them, take them in the house with me, etc., etc. Very trippy and weird stuff, but I was doing this as a kid because I wanted to go back there. And what happened was, suddenly, just out of nowhere, right? Not an experience happened, but an intuitive feeling. Just thinking about it, I go to myself, that's my real home. My family is there. My friends are there. That's where I want to go back to. I have to go back to there. And what happened then was, I felt like something was triggered. Something was triggered. Because what happened then is I started to get frustrated with not being able to go back. And I remember one night nearly begging. I actually prayed to God that I would have this experience again. And apparently that's not a good mix. Because what happened after that was nothing initially. And I kind of shrugged it off at that point and said, oh, well, I'm just going to go to sleep. And that's where it happened. I came to as I lied there, right? And boom, I'm back in this DMT style realm of existence. And it's very strong, very potent, very powerful. And I remember laying down, so I actually thought that I was asleep. But I would later on find out that I was awake throughout this entire experience. And when I felt how powerful things were, and I saw everything, and I heard the buzzing again, I said to myself in an arrogant fashion, oh, I knew I'd be back. Here it is. I'm glad I'm back. I knew it was gonna happen. And from there, something clicked. And I realized the trip was too strong. It was too powerful. It was too overwhelming. And I felt like my ego had detached from me. Whatever I was as an individual focus, even to this day, I do not believe it's the same thing as ego, because I felt my ego detaching. And you have to take into consideration that I was incredibly frightened, but I was silent and I didn't really know who or what I was. But what I saw as the trip was happening was my entire ego, which looked like a physical body, which looked exactly like I did as a child. And they were screaming to the top of their lungs, very terrified, crying. And I didn't really notice that it was me until thinking about it afterwards. But I felt two vibrations. The first one was I felt exactly connected to this entity or this being, and we were experiencing this fright and terror together. We were trapped in a cosmic nightmare, and the geometrical patterns and shapes, there were even entities that looked scary. The vibe was different. It seemed completely alien to what I had just tried to witness again, that I loved and enjoyed and thought that it was just the best thing ever. This was genuinely the complete opposite. It felt like what people describe as hell. And then at one point, I remember actually separating a lot more from this ego. And the ego was still going through immense suffering. And at that point, I felt a bit of relief, because I knew that I wasn't the ego, but at the same time, I was greeted by entities that wanted me to travel upward, where I have no idea. But they were more like, hey, we're here to rescue you from whatever you're experiencing. You have to come with us. And they were machine elves, and I met them with a grain of salt as well, because I was nervous, because I'm like, hey, the ones I saw down there weren't friendly. And they knew this. They realized it after a while, and they kind of, no words, but the vibration was, oh, come on, don't do that. We're here to rescue you. Don't be afraid. And from that, I submitted, and I said, okay, I'm going to go up. But I remember something profound about my focus, and this is how I know that my focus, even when not attached to ego, is unique. Because what I noticed that I did was I wanted that ego to be saved too. I looked back down and I just felt their pain and their remorse and their suffering, and I wanted better for them. And what happened after that was the overseeing entities that came to quote unquote rescue me. It's as if they looked at each other and they shrugged it off, or whatever the case may be, and they left. And from that point on, I woke back up. And when I say woke back up, there was a coming down, and I noticed the ego stopped the screaming and crying. And I actually looked at it at this point and thought it was dead. But then I opened my eyes. I'm suddenly able to open my eyes, and I still seen weird colors and vibrations and distortions, except what was going on was it just felt like I had just woken up from a nightmare. And I remember thinking to myself then, I'm stupid for wanting to experience that. I'm stupid for wanting it to happen. I shouldn't have prayed about it. And I don't want it to happen again. Flat out. Now, for maybe weeks after this, I was traumatized. And any little thing that reminded me of this trip scared me. And it had me uneasy. It had me scared to go outside, especially with no shoes on in the morning. It had me afraid to sit on curbs. It had me afraid to look at rocks. It had me afraid to go to sleep at night. I was incredibly traumatized by this one experience. And I told myself that whatever that is, I hate it. Unfortunately for lucky me, within maybe 3 weeks later, I had another natural experience. And this time, it seemed like they were trying to please me. But even as a focus now, not an ego, as a focus who eventually came down from this experience too and couldn't remember majority of what was going on, my focus didn't even want to entertain it or acknowledge it. It remembered associating it with fear and discomfort, and I wanted nothing to do with it. So I completely ignored it. I completely ignored all the geometry. I ignored the machine elves that were clearly trying to contact me, and it seemed like they were trying to impress me with dances and things of that nature, and they noticed me ignoring it. And from there, within a poof, they kind of vanished, and the rest of the trip just went on naturally. Maybe a few weeks after that, I have another trip, this time at school, while doing a test. Now, it was an easy test. It was a lengthy test. Within that, I had lots of time to daydream. And I'm daydreaming. I was always a kid that liked daydreaming. If I had just watched WWE, then I would try to imagine or reenact the matches in my own head, things of that nature. So I don't know exactly what I was daydreaming. I believe it was a cartoon I was watching. And what I noticed was this cartoon was trying to shift into another one of these experiences. And the disgust and the anger that I got from it actually got me called out by my teacher. She asked, was I okay? Because I had a crazy look on my face and nobody was talking. And from that point on, the experience ceased. And I told my teacher, this is what I told my teacher. I told her that clowns keep messing with me. And she just, imagine how crazy that sounds. So I don't know how she reacted in her head, but she played it as politically correct as possible, not to flat out make me feel like I was crazy at the time. So shout out to Miss Gorman. You know what I'm saying? That's exactly what I said. And she told me maybe they want me, and I didn't understand sarcasm at the time, and she said it so poetically that nobody seen it as a joke in the class. Nobody laughed. Everybody was silent. She said, well, maybe they just want you to focus on your test, Sean. So that's what I did. I focused on my test. And subtly, I still felt their presence with me. But after that, things just got a lot better for that particular moment. So this is genuinely where shit hits the fan. Maybe a year goes by and I'm at my auntie's house. Now, my aunt's house, her former house, so I can talk about it without feeling guilty. She did move. I flat out always thought it was haunted. I've had weird dreams here, weird experiences here. My uncle died in the house. His ashes were kept in the house in the basement where visitors slept, including myself. She had lots of, I don't want to call her a hoarder, but she had those certain type tendencies of keeping lots of things. She had old pictures. She had all types of things that added to clutter, which just made the whole theme and look of the house very, very suspenseful. But whatever. My brother and I, for whatever reason, we had to spend the night over there and then go to school from there. And at the time we was with it, but we did converse with each other and say, her house is scary. It's something we both thought. And I was actually relieved that he felt that way too. But lo and behold, I go to sleep. And guess what happens? I have my first natural DMT trip in over a year. And I don't know if it was triggered by me being frightened of my surroundings. I don't know if it was triggered by the setting being very dark and my mind being very colorful. But I can say this trip was easily the most distinct of all of the ones that I described in detail. So there was no buzzing. There was no ringing. It was just that intense experience I remembered. And I remember thinking to myself, laying on the floor in a sleeping bag, I told myself, not again. And the vibration of those words in that particular moment, I was able to feel myself. And it was so full of worry and fear and a sort of sadness. And I believe that alters something to this day. Because this time, just like all the other times, there was a waiting room. But when I departed from the waiting room, I was in a completely different place from what I had recognized as these particular geometrical patterns and shapes and colors and whatnot. It was a place where there was lots of lightning strikes and bolts going on. And at that particular point, the trippiest thing of this entire story happened. What I seen was clouds, and healthy looking hot summer day type clouds, like very vibrant looking clouds. But what I also saw was the lightning, of course, and it was like a clear lightning storm. But the presence I felt, the vibration I felt, was that ego that went through that suffering and torturing. And basically what I was able to conclude was that ego did die in that particular experience that I had. And what I meant was it felt like it was vibrating at a lower level of experience. And it seemed to have this kind of karmic intensity to it, as if it had some kind of agenda against its surroundings to hurt or harm the ones or whatever is responsible for it experiencing exactly what it experienced. But when I recognized it, I actually tried to communicate with it, and what I found was I was unable to. And to me, it made me sad because they felt lonely, and I remembered the torture, what they went through, because I went through it too. And I didn't know that it was me. I didn't think it was me in this particular case, and I don't think it's me now. But it's very, very interesting that it had the same vibration, just on a lower level of frequency than what I had experienced with simultaneously, of it being myself at one particular point. It even had a completely different look at this point. And the look it had was the look of a little girl that was very mad at something and evil and almost colorless. But again, somehow they didn't notice me. So eventually I abandoned it. And when I say I abandoned it, whatever I was, this cosmic sperm of whatever, I kind of flew off somewhere and didn't even know where I was flying off to or going off to. But I kind of came back to realization of laying on that floor. And I turned in my sleeping bag and faced the other way, fall into what I think is another sleep. Obviously, it wasn't that deep of a sleep. It had to be some REM sleep, because boom, full on instantly. Now I'm in the DMT realm that I was all too familiar with. Now I'm back here, and it was very, very intense. It was very, very powerful. It was very, very cosmic feeling. It was very indescribable, just like all the other ones. Except what happens here is two very important things. The first one was I felt my own sadness and disapproval of what I was experiencing. I did not want to experience it, and I kind of submitted to it, but it was more like I sighed. I went, and I felt my own depression, if you will, from it. And in the oddest, strangest turn of events, what I saw is this ego pop up. And I mean, there's gestures dancing at this point. They're trying to lighten my mood. There's gestures clearly, or entities clearly trying to contact me and interact with me, and they don't want my trip to feel bad. And what happened was this ego pops up, and they're on the side of me now. And I can't tell you if they even knew that I was there. But as I was going through my sighing and sadness and disapproval for that experience, they seemed to be shouting at these elves. And it's more so like a, leave me alone. I hate it here. Stop doing this. I knew this was gonna happen. You always bother me. Leave me alone. I felt the vibration of all of those type things being said. And what I felt was the vibration, and I'm sorry if I'm saturating the word vibration, but what I felt like was the feeling that they were standing up for me. And from that, I actually felt very grateful for them. And at this point, I remember even over there being curious, like, are they really separate from me? Do they really relate to me? Do they even remember what happened last time? Was that even them at this point? All of these things were hitting me, and I was questioning them. And I promise, as soon as the raging stopped from them, the machine elves seemed to have looked sad as well. So now everybody or every entity that's experiencing this appears sad, frustrated, mad, whatever the case may be. But the entities, the jesters, what they felt was more like an understanding and compassionate sadness, as if they felt sorry for both of us. And they faded out gently, smoothly, and the rest of the trip kind of went on. And I tried to acknowledge this presence of this ego. And what I learned was, as soon as that happened, I took it at the time as they ran away from me, but that's not what happened. They were shifted back to the level that they came from, which was lower than the level that I reside. And when I woke up or opened my eyes, it was actually still night. And it seemed like all of that had just happened within maybe 15 minutes, 10 minutes. And what I was hit with was love, but not random love like people talk about in this trip as some revelation or whatever the case may be. The love I felt was for that ego. And I missed them. And I remember saying, I missed them. I have to go back to them. I want to be with them. And what happened after that was the elves seemed to be in my head, but more like random visuals on a safer level of experience this time. And they were repeating a mantra, a very clear mantra. You're too arrogant. 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 And I wondered what arrogant meant at that time. And I forgot who I asked. But when they told me what it meant, I said, oh, so that's not good. And I told them, whoever I was talking to, I remember this. I just don't remember exactly who I was talking to. I said, that's what the clowns meant. They said I was arrogant. So they think I'm a show off. I got offended. But after that, in terms of sensitivity, things took a rest. And I'd say I wouldn't experience another natural DMT trip or vivid supernatural or spiritual experience for maybe years to come after this. And this was when I was 5, and then the other when I was 6 years old. So yeah, this compelling story obviously leaves me with a few questions myself, such as, did I actually detach from my ego? Did my ego learn to vibrate on its own and be completely separate from me? Am I this clairvoyant to other levels of experience because of my ego? Did my ego gain the kind of awareness or focus that I have? Are they a being on their own? All of these things are profound theories that I'm exploring even in my present day. And I remember right before I turned 7, I was kind of thinking back on some of these experiences, not knowing how I even remembered it. Now that I think about it in present day, it's like, I'm surprised I didn't forget these experiences. But then again, I went through the type shit that helps you remember it. You know, the trauma, the being astounded and astonished by what you're seeing. And I remember asking my mom one time, I said, "Ma, are the clowns mad at me? Why did they stop coming to visit?" And she said, "What? What are you talking about?" And I repeated it. "The clowns, they used to always come to talk to me. Now they don't talk to me anymore." And I don't remember exactly what she said, but I remember two things for real, of how she responded to me. The first thing is she gave a very, very satisfying answer. And the second thing is within that, it was definitely an answer that wouldn't satisfy me today. Such as she could have told me it was some type of circus or hallucination or whatever the case may be. But these have been the most important or profound DMT trips that I've had naturally. And even the sensitivity that I have to the information that I have now, it's nothing like it was at this particular point in time. So this video contains my most profound natural DMT trips, and they all come with specific stories, themes, and things to reflect on. Very, very insightful, very, very potent. And I'm actually glad to document all of this, as I will be able to reflect on it in the past. I went through a spiritual awakening or a reawakening or a spiritual renaissance, whatever you want to call it, in 2020, 2021, to where I'm still being hit with intuitive forms of information, and lots of it is cosmic memory. So as things continue to increase in depth from these stories, I definitely will share them all with y'all. Until then, I hope you enjoyed today's video. Please hit that like button for me. Comment any similar experiences that you may have, or anything you want to correct about me, and say, hey, you're experiencing this or that. I'm all too familiar with this. I know what that is. Please let me know. You know, we're here to help each other. I'm not an expert on DMT. I'm just somebody who's had natural experiences. So comment whatever you please, as you will. I'll get back to you ASAP. Please share the stream if possible. And most of all, stay blessed. This is DMT Journal.
Mass ignorance seemed like a yearly curse. Turn on the TV and the industry killed me thirst. But the denial of my peers really killed me worse. Shit, all the things that's unfolding was a theory first. Shit, it's no wonder that I forced that kundalini burst. Trying to protect my spirit like my mother shield her purse. I really thought the last thing I'd see was my nurse, or astral project to see the color of my hearse. But in theory, I learned that I was the earth. That's why I cried when I realized my rebirth. I'm the flower from the dark place that rose from dirt, that came here to tell the world that my mother's hurt.